Howdy, BeefaloBart here, and in this video, first off, let me thank you for watching, and if this is actually being looked at as a form of resume, please take the time to watch the video all the way through, and you'll get kind of an understanding of me in general and why I think that this is suitable in a way for what I'm going for. Alright, so, with that out of the way, now, the purpose of this video is to show some of my background and a little bit about the history of me and how I obtained the knowledge that I have and what types of basic knowledge that I do have. Okay, to start off with, early on in life, as a child, as a kid, about 18 billion years ago, back in the 70s, yes, I'm almost 50 years old, shut up. Anyway, I was that kid in the neighborhood that, okay, lived in a nice neighborhood with a split-level house. We were middle class, I guess you could say. The last real decent house, other than, you know, the last few that we lived in, but one particular, we lived in a nice little split-level house with a pool in the backyard and hammock in the backyard and two-car garage and the mom and the pop and the two kids, and yeah, just a storybook middle-class family. But I was that kid in the neighborhood that I was all about my BB guns. Yeah, I love my BB guns, my pellet rifles, things of that nature, pistols, rifles, and was always experimenting with them. You know, getting to know the kids in the neighborhood, and if they had a BB gun or a pellet rifle or whatever, and they broke it, I would take my allowance and I'd give them, you know, $5 for their broken air gun. Well, as I started collecting these broken air guns, I would actually start taking them apart, finding out what was wrong with them, fixing them, putting them back together again as a full working rifle, and then would end up selling them back to the other kids in the neighborhood for 15, 20 bucks, you know. I wasn't, you know, the greatest business person at the time, but still not. But I got to know the inner workings of them, and that really got me on the thing for really loving firearms and guns. I grew up, we spent our summer vacations near Charleston, South Carolina. My grandparents had a farm. It wasn't a big farm, it was 50 acres, but we did a lot of rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting, dove, quail, fishing, general farm work. But, you know, being that we hunted every weekend, depending on what was in season. If doves were in season, we were out dove hunting. Squirrels were in season, we'd go out squirrel hunting. We'd take a .22 rifle or a 410 or 16 gauge, or, you know, that was our primaries that we used at the time. It wasn't until much later that I was old enough and big enough kid to actually use a 12 gauge. But, you know, grew up around firearms and had a respect for them, and was taught how to respect a firearm so that I didn't become one of those knucklehead kids that goes to school with a gun. Yeah, anyway, so, but going through high school, whenever I was going through high school, it was not uncommon to see, you know, growing up around the South at the time, senior parking lot, a pickup truck with a gun rack in the back with a shotgun or lever action rifle in the gun rack of their vehicle on school property. It just was one of those things. It just happened. And yes, there was some punk that turned me in, because after school I was planning on going to meet up with some friends and go shooting, and I had a couple guns hidden in my exotic sports car, Volkswagen Bug. And yeah, long story short, I ended up getting my guns back and not getting kicked out of school, and was able to graduate. But that's a long story, and we'll keep it short at that. So, but during school, I was always that kid, whenever I wasn't the band geek, was always scribbling, always drawing guns, drawing my own designs, things like that. So I was always doodling about them, thinking about them, although I wasn't one of those, you know, gangbang thug wannabe piece of crap that goes out there and holds up liquor stores or whatever, or goes, you know, doing drive-by shootings. I wasn't one of those kind of people. I was more into what I like about guns is like with the AR-15, it has its whole thing. The AR-15, some people look at it as, oh, it's a horrible assault rifle. It's meant for killing people. Okay, yes, it was initially developed as the AR-15 for the U.S. military, and before it was adopted as the M16. And it was designed and developed to be a military firearm for killing people. It's a evil, dangerous assault weapon. Well, the AR-15 is now the designation for a semi-automatic variation of the M16s. Whether it be the M4 styling or the A2 styling, which is, you know, a throwback to the 80s era, or the original A1 styles, or the original M16s. The reason why I like that platform is not because it's a military style weapon, and yes, I'll get onto that here in just a second, but I like the fact that you could easily customize and accessorize so many different aspects of it. You could make it anything from this ultimate combat style survival whatever gun to some funky, wild, exotic space gun looking competition rifle or accuracy based rifle. Or they're accurate, they're reliable, they're easy to work on, they're easy to clean, they're great platforms. I admire the design aspects of it and so much of that. Now, before I graduated from high school, I signed up to join the National Guard, and then shortly after I graduated from high school, I completely transferred from National Guard into active duty Army. And I do have it's not a DD-214, it's called something else for the National Guard, but I do have that for a good separation from them to go to physical active duty, and was stationed in Berlin, Germany. So I actually transferred over and went to active duty Army. So I have both National Guard and active duty Army experience behind me with paperwork to prove it. My MOS was 11 Bravo. This is my primary. 11 Bravo, for those who don't know what it is infantry. With secondary MOS. MOS is basically the abbreviations for what your job title was. Like 11 Bravo is infantry. One of my secondaries was 11 Hotel, which is anti-tank, and then 11 Charlie, which was mortar or mortar infantry. 11 Mike, which was also mechanized infantry, like the Bradley. I've even worked as an 88 Mike considerably, which is truck driver, and I've also been a unit administrator and multiple different roles within both active and National Guard. Weapon systems qualifications, I qualified expert on every single weapon system that I qualified on, except for the M203 grenade launcher. Long story, but I always was the next step down. It was just one shot shy of getting expert marksmanship on it. You had expert, you had marksman and sharpshooter. It's been a considerable number of years to remember which is which, but expert, of course, was, you know, the better of the three. But I mean, I had my scores on the M16. The score was 40 out of 40 was your score. A perfect 40 meant that you had 40 rounds of fire and you didn't miss. You hit all your targets and made 40 points. And I never qualified with less than a 40 out of 40 score on the M16, whether it's the M16A1, which I started on, or the M16A2. I did have one instance where I scored a 46 out of 40. Another story for the other time. So yeah, that qualification level alone of growing up hunting, growing up shooting at an early age, and then progressing into military, both National Guard and active duty Army, meant that I had plenty of trigger time on the M16 platform, AK-47 as well, the M60 machine gun, the M249. I put lots of rounds fully automatic through those, M250 caliber, countless different weapon systems throughout the years, And so that alone should give you an indication that I have a background in actual shooting of these firearms. I've also worked at multiple different gun shops and sales, shipping, receiving. I've worked at one where I was doing refinishing, parkerizing, yeah, multiple different roles throughout the gun shop environments. So I had a lot of hands-on with the firearms. And if you're in sales of guns, or firearms, I really hesitate to call them guns because it just sounds negative with the way today's society is. In other words, liberal pieces of crap. But, the firearms industry, whenever you're selling, in the older days, you could pretty much fudge your way through because, you know, it's one thing. But when the internet came around and it started getting kind of popular and stuff, people started doing their homework a little bit, and they would read forums, and they would look at pictures, and they would read stories about, and they would go to this place called YouTube or something like that, and they would actually research some of these guns and actually know a little bit about them before they come into a gun shop to actually buy one. So you kind of had to know your stuff. And later on, I was thankful for one gun shop that I won't mention because I really don't care for them. But working with them, there was a couple different online training programs, and you got to learn in-depth details about the firearms and accessories and products and so forth. And I took it upon myself. I got in there and I trained. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about the smaller aspects of these guns. You know, moving on from there, I've also done some competitive shooting in various local matches, nothing major, but they were combat style pistol matches, whether they were just a small gun shop and a small indoor range with kind of more relaxed rules, to even going to a rather large gun club locally that actually has cowboy action shooting, hence the name BeefaloBart. That's how I kind of came across that name. Different story for a different time, but I liked it. I liked shooting. I liked shooting competitively, but I was more interested in actually working on them and building customs and that kind of stuff, and sharing my knowledge with other people on them. Now, putting all that aside, it shows a background of occupational work with firearms in both the commercial and military. I've also worked law enforcement, but that was mostly corrections, which means working in a prison environment in both county and state-wise, and you really don't do a whole bunch with firearms there. You are trained on them, but you don't really use them. So, to kind of show a little bit of my knowledge and showcase that I'm not completely full of it, only partially. I kind of briefly touched on this in different video, but we're going to start off with the LVOAC, okay, and in comparison with the lightweight M4. Now, first off, besides the grungy paint job that I've got on here, the LVOAC is a product from a company, I believe it's War Products. I'm not really going to get too much in depth on the actual company names and so forth, because I'm sure that that's you know, I don't want to say anything good or bad about the companies. A lot of people I've heard of complain about the fact that the end of the barrel is actually right here where my mouse cursor is. So when you actually put a flash suppressor on, it's putting excessive flash and heat in this location right here. Some people complain about it, but you know what? Who cares? It looks cool, right? When you actually throw a suppressor on there, the suppressor starts at this point back here and comes forward. So it's recessing the suppressor back in just a little bit. I think that's pretty cool. Your attaching points, you see there's 550 cord, which is what this is wrapped around here. It kind of acts as a gripping mechanism, so forth. You got the larger holes are actually just for cooling, as with the big triangular shaped holes, but you've got the smaller holes in between. Those are actually threaded so that you can attach the Picatinny Rail sections that go along here. Picatinny Rail is this little small section right here with the slots cut into it. It's a Picatinny Rail. It was based off of the Picatinny Arsenal. It was a design in a mil-spec standard 1913 pattern of specific. It's like 3/4 of an inch wide. There's a set spacing between the grooves and that kind of stuff. But as you see, there's 2 screws that hold this in place. This piece right here could actually be moved to any location on this side or the bottom or the other side as well. The top has got a full Picatinny rail going essentially from here all the way back to about right here. The sights that are actually on this gun are representative of the Magpul Imbus variety. They are, well, not really that inexpensive. They're a polymer iron sight system. And the only problem I see with it overall is there's a little bit of a, this right here, the rear sight portion of it is sticking up a little bit too proud. It would not be sticking up at all. There wouldn't be any height of the iron sight sticking up right there where my mouse cursor is. That's a little bit too big. But what it is these lay flat against the upper Picatinny rail so that you can utilize your optics. Anybody in their right mind would not have an optic set here. Now, keep in mind, this is actually representing a QD, or a quick detachable scope mount. But realistically, a lot of people put that on there because they look cool. They say, oh, I want them as backup iron sights. BIS, they come up with all kind of acronyms for them, but they're meant to be a backup iron sight. You cannot use them in the folded down position. There are some other brands that are out there that do have the ability to use them like a pistol style sight while they're folded down, but these are not that type. These are Magpul Imbus front and rear sights, mid $30 price range, usually around $55 for the rear sight. You have a little wing right here, and you could depress, or you can depress the very top center section of it and be able to make them pop up, and they're a pop-up backup iron sight. You cannot use them with this particular style scope. They're usually developed for a red dot optic that would not have this portion of the scope would not be there. I'm not going to get technical on a lot of things. Well, I am on a lot of things, but your eyepiece right here, where you actually look in, your eye relief is going to be around 2.5 to 3 inches. So that means that your head is going to have to be really far back here, and your eye would have to be right here where my mouse cursor is to about right in here to be able to see through that scope. That's putting your head a little bit too far back. So this scope would actually need to be pushed a little bit farther forward. You've got a cantilever type scope mount, and a lot of people will put it in this configuration right here so that it's primarily on the lower receiver so that you can push it farther forward so you don't have to have your head all the way to the back of the stock, which is going to make this an uncomfortable rifle to shoot, even though this is representative of the Magpul UBR buttstock. That will actually, there's a button right here that you can toggle to the rearward and slide the stock back and extend the back of the stock to about right in here, which wouldn't make it too difficult to use if you extended the stock out. And the only reason why you would have the stock pushed in that far is if you're wearing body armor and it's building up the layers of clothing and body armor away from your shoulder, and you're naturally going to have that push farther forward. So, you know, it is possible that your head's going to be a little bit, you know, different positioning, but you're still, your eye is going to be within 2.5 to 3 inches away from the scope. So that's something to take into consideration for people who are developing games and want to have realistic, I don't know how the hell, you can see that I just did the air quotes, okay, but to have somewhat realistic firearms animations, you're going to want to have to take into consideration the fact that a scope like this, you have an eye relief of 2.5 to 3 inches. Okay, red dot optics, you can have them mounted right here, or you can have them mounted up right here. It doesn't really matter on a red dot optic. However, you're going to see that most people who are serious about their optics are going to have them mounted on the upper receiver, because on most, I'm going to say this, most AR-15 based platform weapons, not all, there's a company called Aero Position that makes a one-piece upper handguard, upper receiver and handguard is contained in one unit. But we're not talking about that one. We're talking about the LVOAC at this point. Got a billet upper receiver and kind of a lightweight skeletonized forearm. Reason why you're going to see a lot of people mounting your scope here is because this is not going to change. Your barrel is going to be pretty secure overall. The way that the barrel attaches to the receiver is it slips in, and at the 12 o'clock position there's a notch cut in the upper receiver's grooves and threads, and there's a post on the top of the barrel at the 12 o'clock position, and it just slides in, and then a nut goes over the top of the barrel and threads around it. So that's going to actually give you what's called a barrel nut, which locks it against the upper receiver. But if you bump your upper handguard, there's a slim possibility that it may shift its position a little bit. So having your rear sight here and front sight there, if you take off your scope, you're not necessarily going to always have the correct point of aim for any kind of precision shooting. They're just, these sights here on the front and rear are meant as a backup system in case your optics fail, or if your red dot optic, your battery dies. Unless you go with Trojicon ACOGs, which have fiber optic. There's some other rifle scopes that are out there that do have fiber optics, but you know, the ACOG is actually represented in the game. The magazine that's in here, this is an unusual magazine. The thin portion of your receiver comes down, the magazine flares out and gets triple wide. This is a Surefire brand magazine, and they're designed to hold 60 rounds, and there are larger ones that'll hold, I think, up to 90 rounds. But they're extended magazines. They will hold a larger capacity, unlike the way that this game represents the fact that it's a percentage. Where the hell did that come from? You either have, in AR-15 platforms, you're going to have 5-round magazines, you're going to have a 1-round plug, which bypasses the magazine, but you have a 5-round mag, 10-round mag, 15-round, 20, 30. You'll find some that are 40 rounds, 60, 90, and then you have the beta mags, which are a double drum 100-round. There's another company that made a magazine that was a 90-round drum that spirals off to only on one side. I won't mention the movie, but there was a movie where that was featured in, and they had neon lights on the inside of it. Okay, whatever, cool. I have to move position so I can get lighting again. Oh, I see the light. The bolt carrier group, on, if you want to get technical on AR-15 based weapons, are typically what's called gas impingement. And okay, I'm not going to complain too awful much, but since this is a LVOAC and it's a direct gas impingement, you can kind of see it here and there, but there's a gas block here and a small thin tube that stays close to the barrel, angles, goes up, and then goes into the receiver. And the bolt carrier group has what's called a key, which receives the other end of that tube, collects the gas, and throws the bolt rearward, extending into the buttstock a small distance. That's why AR-15s always have that tube on the end of the back, is because the bolt carrier group actually extends into the buttstock. The pistol grip on this just happens to be a Magpul. It's, from what it looks like, it's modular front and rear straps. Relatively new product. The scope, I'm not going to mention the brand of it, because there's a couple companies that make a scope like this, but it would, instead of it being an 8x magnification, most scopes you're going to have that look similar to this are actually going to be 1 to 4x magnification or 1 to 6x, meaning it's either no magnification at 1x or 4 times magnification at 4x or 6 times magnification at 6x. Kind of common on these. This is a quick detachable scope mount, but if I were to change over to a red dot optic, I hate when it changes that view, sorry. Lightweight M4 has got an L-can. That one's got a 12x. What the hell I'm thinking about that. Of course I don't have one on there, but the scope that I have on here on this MP7 is actually representative of what you're going to find is called like the Aimpoint Comp M4 couple different versions of aim point style reticle, and you see it has a large cantilever reticle. This one also has the Magpul pop-up sights, or the emboss sights. Again, not drawn correctly because it has an oversized rear aperture, and yes, the rear aperture on the Magpul emboss does have a flip-up arrangement for 2 different ranges, but that's not it. So the reason why you have these backup sights like this, and actually this sight would actually need to be back a little bit farther, because you cannot move that front sight forward anymore. And I know it's kind of hard to see in the lighting right here, but what's going to happen is if you try to pop up your rear sight, or your front sight, excuse me, it's going to hit the front of your optic, and you're not going to be able to use your iron sights. By moving your red dot optic, and there's only going to be a small little red dot in the center, or green. Some companies even have a blue dot on the inside, or different crosshairs available. But you move it back just a little bit. You don't have any eye relief whatsoever. There's no magnification on this scope whatsoever. By moving it back just a little bit on this firearm, you could quickly hit this one, and this would pop up, and you can actually utilize your iron sights through your scope. It's called indexing your scope. So the height of the scope mount needs to be in proportion height-wise to where, when these sights are folded up, you have the ability to use your iron sights through your optics. So if your battery dies, this is a battery-powered red dot, and if your battery dies, or you don't have time to turn it on, you can quickly reach up there, and since you have your hand here on the pistol grip, or on the forearm, and here on this pistol grip, you can quickly just reach up, and then bang bang, just one swift movement, you can pop up those rear sights and be able to have a quick battle sight. So, and there's 2 different options. You have a lower third, and then you have center. Meaning lower third, your line of sight for your iron sights is on the lower 1/3 portion of your optic, giving you more field of view. Or a lot of the earlier sights actually look straight through. Your line of sight through your iron sights goes directly through and indexes with the red dot on the center of your optic. Yes. So, if that alone doesn't convince you that I have a little bit of knowledge about these different firearms, just in the details that I went on, just on the M4 basic, you know, the LVOAC, and if you look at also the lightweight M4, this is a Magpul handguard, Magpul Mo pistol grip. This is a B5 SOP mod buttstock. By the way, the LVOAC, the standard buttstock on it is this buttstock right here. The B5 mod SOP, which has 2 different little tabs here and here. It's kind of hard to see on here, but they're actually battery compartments for storing CR123 batteries, which you would use for a lot of standard, like the EOTech optics. Again, you got the Magpul emboss sights, you got the Soundsco Omega, and you got the Surefire magazine, Magpul grip here, Magpul pistol grip, Magpul Mo. In fact, the handguard is actually a Troy Alpha Rail, and this is the old design, which has just the oval slots. They've now started doing an M-lock variation, and I think they also did a key mod variation very briefly. What I mean by that is there's these oval slots that are going down the handguard. These are attaching points for attaching your Picatinny Rail sections all around the different points of the handguard. 3, 6, 9, 12, that kind of stuff. Actually, you can put them right here on this line, anywhere where those oval slots are, you can mount a rail section. The optic on here is a military style LCAN optic. Decent rugged optic. Some people love it, some people didn't. Dust covers. Primarily, and I think if you're going to have any exotic variation of these M4 based weapons, I'm not sure if I have one with me, and I don't. But the dust cover on the M4 based weapons, you can actually get engravings and stuff like that on them. But yeah, that's the basics of the lightweight M4. You know, the M700 carbon, it's a not a very common rifle. It's not a very common chassis system, as it's called. M700 Tactical. Most of the tactical versions, the earlier ones, didn't have the detachable box magazine. This one portrayed does. Again, a little pet peeve of mine is you wouldn't have a rail section right here. You'd actually want to attach to the stock itself. Yeah, I don't really have anything on this. This is a stock M700 Tactical. You would have a cap on the end of the barrel that hides your threading. You really wouldn't want anything rail-wise there. You'd want to attach to your stock. If you're going to attach anything, normally you wouldn't be attaching anything at all to this stock except for a bipod, which would attach to a stud that was right here. Okay, and this adjustable cheek piece comes up and down, and you can add spacers here to extend that. In your hand position on this type of stock, your shooting hand would naturally go on your pistol grip here, but your offhand is typically right here on this hook, pushing it against your shoulder. You're using a stock like this off of a bench rest, or you're using it off of a bipod, or you're resting it off of a vehicle or a windowsill. It's almost always going to be supported somewhere along the handguard here. And with a bolt action rifle, as you can see sort of portrayed in this right here, you're going to have a free float barrel, meaning the barrel does not touch the stock right here. Now, some rifle makers will actually, as you can see on, or may not see, the thick portion of this barrel is actually a slight taper, and you'll have another taper from here, usually to here, and then you'll have a straight, non-tapered section of the barrel for a couple inches right here. And most stock makers will actually bed that portion, meaning they'll actually fill it with fiberglass or, you know, a hard resin material that is in this portion right here that supports this portion of the barrel. And you're going to have a lug right here between the barrel and the receiver that extends down, that you can attach a screw to and actually bond and get a good metal-to-metal contact with usually a metal sleeve or a spacer that goes between the bottom plate and the receiver, so that you can help to improve accuracy overall. You want your barrel to be free floated because whenever you fire, as the bullet's spinning through the rifling, it's going to cause a vibration or rotational cavitation effect, and you want that barrel to be able to move freely and not contact the stock, which would interrupt that and will change the way that the bullet actually exits from the barrel. Even though you have a threaded muzzle and you have a cap over the end when you're not using a suppressor or a flash hider or anything like that, you're usually going to have an 11-degree crown on the end of the barrel so that it's a smooth release of the projectile from the end of the muzzle. And again, talking about the pet peeve of mine, this kind of looks like a Leupold scope. Who in the hell, in any kind of accuracy shooting, is going to have their scope mounted that high above the bore line? The farther you are from the bore line, and yes, there's ways of calculating and adjusting for that, but no serious shooter is going to have a rail section right here, and no serious shooter is going to have that scope to begin with, but their scope that high above the bore line. You're going to want this portion, you want this tube of the scope to be as close as possible to this rail. Even if you have to raise the rail up or raise the rings up only to clear the bell housing or the objective lens, you know, the end lens of the scope, you want this to be as close as possible to the barrel without touching within a certain amount. What happens when you're shooting a lot of rounds to a bolt action rifle or any rifle, you're going to start getting heat off of the barrel and you're going to create heat vapor. At some point I'll probably show another video with my Precision AR-15. I use heat shields on that extend the length of the outside of the scope. They don't do anything to the scope's magnification or visibility, but they extend out this way. In fact, mine extend a pretty fair distance. So if you were to look at a standard AR platform rifle, kind of give you an idea, whenever I'm shooting rapid fire precision, my scope goes from about right here. My hand guard is 15 inches, my barrel is 18 inches on my precision rifle. but we're going to assume that this handguard is a 15-inch handguard. It's not, it's a 13. But we're going to assume that it is a 15-inch handguard. My scope goes from here, and with the extra heat shields on it, it extends all the way to about right here. And that's to compensate for the heat rising up from the barrel would actually cause a mirage effect and blur my vision through a high magnification rifle scope. But the thing is, you do not want your scope to be that high away from the barrel. It's just a no-brainer. That's too high on the M700 Carbon. It's too high on the 700 Tactical. And if you look at it on the standard M700, it's way too high there as well. And if you were to take the scope off of this rifle right here, you could technically use the iron sights. So if we look at this, I'm going to take and just pull the scope off. Now if I try to use this rifle, I actually have to select it first, wouldn't I? Okay, you're going to get the generic iron sight for the game, but you're not going to have any zoom whatsoever, and you'd have a slightly different sight picture and everything. I know you're not getting an ADS on this to aim down sights, but you know, the iron sights are fine, but yeah, the scopes are just way too high. I'm going to briefly talk about pistols here. The Beretta 93R, yes, that's what this is. I know we just know it as the 93R. As you can see, this is the normal position for the safety selector would be on the slide. In this case, your selector right here, you got 3 white dots. That's symbolized it is in 3-shot burst mode, and then you could actually push it up and it would go into semi-automatic, or you pull the trigger and it only fires 1 bullet. By having it in this position, it allows the gun to fire in 3-shot burst mode, so 1 pull of the trigger, 3 bullets come out. Typically, whenever these were first brought out, and there was never been a major production run of the 93R, because it is an aluminum framed gun typically, and that aluminum would wear out extremely quickly, so it would have to be made out of stainless steel or chromoly steel to be more durable, which added weight to it, especially when you're talking about 15 to 17 rounds, or the higher capacity magazines. You also had this right here, which actually folded down to an angle of about this way to give you a place to hold on to it on the front while you're firing a 3-shot burst. Suppressor on here is a Chicago Osprey, one of my favorite suppressors on the market. Typically represented in this game, the suppressor right here is actually a little bit oversized, and it's sitting a little too high here. The way that this particular suppressor works is the majority of the air cavity is below the bore line, purposely to lower this part of the suppressor where my mouse cursor is going across the top edge. It sits lower so that you could use the iron sights on most pistols. Most pistols that come equipped with a threaded muzzle are going to also come equipped with taller front and rear sights to compensate for seeing over the top of your suppressor. You use a different suppressor like the Octane, which is another company's product. I'm a Chicago fan, sorry. But if you're using the other one, the Octane, I'm sorry, is Chicago. Thinking about the Tyrant, the tier in the game. That's an AAC product, Advanced Armament. They're not as big in diameter, so they're good, but they're not as effective as the Osprey would be. This is one of the most effective suppressors on the market, by the way. Yeah. Not going to get too far carried away on this gun, because in reality, this is not a very common pistol. Definitely not a very common pistol found around the United States. And sorry, if this is supposed to be taking place in New York City, New York is not a gun-friendly state, and it damn near takes an act of Congress for a civilian to own a regular pistol, much less anything below 16 inches on an AR-15 or a rifle or a carbine. would become illegal unless you had a specific short-barreled rifle tax stamp. I've got one. It is a little small bluish green stamp with a number written on it that was handwritten number, and a big piece of paper with a signature and everything else on it from the ATF saying that I can have a rifle or carbine with a barrel shorter than 16 inches and an overall length below a certain distance also. So in essence, I had to have a special tax stamp to be able to have the MP5 clone that I've got with a short barrel and have a buttstock on it and vertical pistol grip and all that fancy crap. So obtaining a Beretta 93R in New York City is just not gonna happen. There's a very small number of them to begin with in the entire country, but being that New York state itself is a anti-gun state, and it takes a lot to be able to get a standard firearm. And let's not even talk about the New York compliant AR-15s. Yeah, there's no such thing as being able to buy an actual LVOAC, because the primary LVOAC does not have a 16-inch barrel. It do not. It actually has a shorter barrel, and yeah, it's you can get it with a 14.7-inch barrel with a pin and welded flash suppressor on there. That the flash suppressor is longer to meet the minimum 16 inches. To me, it's kind of a stupid thing, because you would normally have a 14.5-inch barrel on that gun, and you'd be running a long flash hider like a Flaming Pig or something that's similar to that, which is like a hollow can, or you'd be running a suppressor on it. So yeah, it's a cool product. I like the product. I'm not talking bad about it. In fact, I'm probably gonna order one of the cheesy Chinese knockoff LVOAC handguards in 15-inch so I can run it on one of my other AR-15s that I've got. Yes, I have several. Okay, so the 93R, since it does have a 3-shot burst mode, it would be classified as a fully automatic weapon, and that would not be legal at all in New York. It is not a Class 3 state. But if you lived in a non-communist state like I live in South Carolina, I can legally go to a gun shop and purchase an automatic weapon. I can buy a fully automatic M16 rifle or an M4 with a 14.5-inch barrel, and I can get a silencer for it, and it's a machine gun, and I can have a silencer, and yeah. Okay, well, first off, if I were to buy an M16 platform rifle, would be able to buy the quote-unquote M4, because that didn't come into effect until, the later 90s. So it would have to be an M16. Reason why is, as a civilian, as a normal person, as long as I have a clean criminal history, because there is a background investigation that's going to happen. Not just one, but if I want the suppressor, and I want the fully automatic, and I want the short barrel, and all that, to have the cool M4 with a suppressor, and that not. The fully automatic portion is one $200 federal tax stamp and background investigation that can take up to and over a year sometimes. The 14.5-inch barrel means that it's a short-barreled rifle, and there's another tax stamp. And, well, suppressor, there's another tax stamp. Each one of them is $200. That's $600 worth of tax stamps and 3 separate background checks for the same gun. Okay, so moving along from there, as a normal, average, everyday person with a clean background and no criminal history, I can legally buy that and wait the 1 year for all those tax stamps to come back. But I can only own automatic weapons that were manufactured prior to 1986. Meaning, the M4 didn't exist back then, but the M16 did. So I could legally buy an M16 lower receiver. You're just buying that lower portion of the gun that allows it to go fully automatic, and the only difference is a small little extra trough cutout, an extra pinhole, and that means that your selector switch, instead of only going flat this way, where the oblong section of selector would be on this side, and the little pointy part, which you can't see right here, pointing to right here, and then you have straight up and down, But when you flip it into this section where the long part is facing towards the front, that would be either full auto or 3-shot burst mode, depending on if it was an A2 style fire control. But by having that extra little pinhole and the disconnector and sear and so forth for the M16, yeah, just for having that little bit of difference between having an extra little cut in the receiver and an extra hole drilled in it means that I can go to a website right now and buy a stripped lower receiver to build my own AR-15 from for $40. But if it's an M16 lower receiver, you're going to start at around $25,000. Reason for is this lower receiver, legally manufactured prior to 1986 as an M16 fully automatic lower receiver, is a hard to get rare piece. Thus the price of them is going to be exceedingly high, and yeah, so you're looking at $600 in tax stamps and $25,000 for a lower receiver. And then like if you're doing the LVOAC, you can get that upper receiver from them. Yeah, it's like $1,400 for the upper receiver, and then you gotta have to get the buttstock, which is, you know, $100, and then this $100 for the magazine, $140 I think for this magazine, $30 for this, $30 for this, and yeah, there's a lot of money invested in being able to create an M4 based weapon. So as you see, I have way too much knowledge built up on the little aspects. And the last thing I'm going to cover, and I touched on briefly in another video, to go to a different weapon, we're going to look at the Historian. This is an M14 based weapon system that was developed by the U.S. Army in Springfield, Armory in fact, was manufactured by Springfield and Winchester, and I think one other company also made them. There's some other companies that make this style receiver now to make this type rifle. We're going to ignore the fact that it has a chromed appearance to it and a stainless steel barrel, but you're not commonly going to find this as a castle nut. This is a separate piece that threads on inside of this this assembly here. That's almost always going to be black. It's very uncommon to find them in a silvered color. They get a lot of heat, and yeah, it's just uncommon. Okay, this stainless steel barrel, we're going to assume that this is a M1A precision rifle that has been upfit with the pretties, pretty stock, and, you know, chromed out receiver. So it's going to have a thicker, heavier barrel underneath the handguard. Little thing like this metal clip that's right here, part of the upper handguard, actually fits into grooves cut into the barrel to hold the upper handguard in place. This is a military style stock system that actually is pretty nice. Nice little details in it. Reason you can tell it's a military styling is it has the cuts for the butt plate, and as you look right here, this type handguard, you are missing one detail. Alright, whoever modeled this gun, I'm going to have to fuss at you a little bit on a couple little small details. There's going to be an additional hole right where my mouse is. You have the two screws for the sling swivel attaching point, or sling attaching point right here. You're going to have an additional hole here, which is for venting off excess gas from the gas system. The way that the rifle actually fires is this is the charging handle portion here, and this extends all the way across here, drops down, there's a rod that connects all the way into here, which connects into this piston housing. When you shoot, gas is dropped in through this piston assembly, pushes the operating rod back against a spring, and it connects with a roller that's on the end of this wing sticking out from the bolt, and this is kind of cammed into the charging handle and causes the charging handle to slide to the rear and then back forward again. You can see there's a spring underneath there. So you're missing the vent hole that should be here in the handguard, because if there's too much gas built up, it'll actually vent it out and it comes out through that hole. That's why the sling swivel is behind there, so wrapping your arm around the sling and you're holding onto the sling, this hole right here is not going to blow hot gas onto your fingers. So yeah, that's something that's very, very minor that most people will never see on this model. So it's not a huge thing. But you went through the building, you actually have this hole here. This hole here, you're meant for when you disassemble the M1A, the M14, whatever you want to consider this model to actually be, or the M21, or in this case it's the Historian. You would insert a piece of your cleaning rod into here and use it as a handle to pry in a arcing motion towards the magazine, and the trigger guard itself pivots back and unlatches an arm, and you can actually pull that whole trigger assembly out in one unit. Of course, you'd want your magazine out before you do that, and then just by doing that, that allows you to actually pivot the whole barrel assembly and action assembly off of this little piece on the cap. This cap actually fits over the end of the stock and kind of locks in the upper handguard, so it acts like a pivot. Whenever you actually take your trigger assembly out, this whole section right here pivots upward this way and unlatches and just kind of presses, it just fits in here, so it just comes right apart. So you can take the lower and the stock assembly and trigger assembly and upper assembly, just pops right apart. So it's nice you actually have that detail of the hole right there in the trigger guard. And you know, there would actually be right here behind that section of trigger guard, the metal is fine there, but you're going to have more of a gap. A little black shadowed out section is all you would need to put in there if you want to be really, really accurate. And I'm not saying you have to, because this is fine. Nobody's ever going to see that detail. But you would need a gap right there for your trigger guard to unlatch from this metal portion of the trigger assembly. Another little small insignificant thing. Overall, this thing looks freaking excellent. I'm very ecstatic on how well this model was actually represented. And if you look different light reflections, you see imperfections in the surface of the wood and the graining, like the finish wasn't done really, really well. That's a good thing. It shows imperfections in the wood. Now, why you actually have a notch cut out in the wood right here, I don't know. That shouldn't be there. This should just go straight all the way back. There shouldn't be a notch here at all. You do have a slight notch comes down here, but you don't have one right here, because you see the spring. You don't want to see the spring. If you can see the spring, dirt can see the spring. Alright, little imperfections in the channel right here that the charging handle slides in is normal. That's a normal thing that happens from the way it was machined, and that's, like I said, it's a normal thing. But you have a round hole here and a notch here. The notch, you're pulling it back, you can kind of push up and lock the bolt in place, but when you bring it all the way to the rear is where you're actually able to unhook it, so that you can kind of get it away from the bolt assembly a little bit to undo it right there. That's fine. But if this is supposed to be a dressed up military stock, an actual true normal early military based M14 stock, which is found on almost all of the M14s, original M14s, will have a metal patch, not metal, excuse me, a wooden patch plugged into where there was a hole right there, and that hole was cut out and a selector switch was right here, and that's how you converted that. By switching that lever over, you went from semi-automatic to fully automatic. I mean, you went even as far as having, and I can't really see it right now because the lighting is not perfect, but if you're able to get it just right, you can actually see an imperfection in the side of the receiver where it looks like there was a full auto selector switch right there. Markings on the receiver, I really can't see a whole lot of it because of the light and reflections and everything else, but normally it would say US Rifle M1A or US Rifle M14, Springfield Armory, and they would also have the serial number at the bottom, or it could say Winchester or whatever the brand is. I'm not sure what that medallion is supposed to be in the buttstock. I guess a pretty, but since it's a military style stock, this portion of the stock right here, the very back plate of it, is going to rotate up and allow you to place that plate on your shoulder. It will come out to an angle like that. I mean, if you looked at it side on, it would have a, I don't know, about a 15-20 degree lip going this way, where that just flipped out that way. And underneath there would be a small door where you could actually store your cleaning products in it, and it wouldn't have had a little button right there. You wouldn't have seen that. It's, as you flip it up, it's just held up by press tension. Scope mount, we'll say I'm giving pretty good props on the scope mount overall, except for that right there. Most M1A scope mounts are not going to have that, because what happens is you take off a piece that attaches into that dovetail for the rear of the scope mount to lock into what would be the stripper clip charging port. You take off the other piece, you put that in there, and it locks into the bottom of the scope mount. Attaches with a screw that screws into the side of the receiver. There's a groove milled into the side of the receiver where a strip of metal on the scope mount fits into that. And this is your bolt lock. But you also have a screw that goes vertically straight down that actually pushes pressure slightly on the top of the receiver to level out and lock in the scope mount. So, like I said, everything is pretty good overall on this. Again, just nitpicking details to show that I can actually spot things like this. And not very many manufacturers make these scope mounts. That's an awful big scope ring. It still should be sitting a little bit lower. Since this is a marksmanship rifle, you want your scope as low as possible. You want this close to here, and you want this part as close to here as possible. So you'd want your scope mount to come down a pretty fair amount. My last M1A was a Springfield M1A precision model, and you could barely see much between the bottom of the scope here and the actual scope mount itself, which put the objective lens, or the end lens, really close to the upper handguard. And again, for rapid fire, which I enjoy doing rapid fire precision shooting, so I put the heat shields on, just, yeah, whatever. So, I am sure I have bored the living crap out of anybody watching this video, and I do apologize for that. But the whole point of this video was to establish the fact that I am trying to look for a career in the video game industry, specifically, also perhaps maybe even the movie industry, for technical advisor position for firearms and firearms related materials. I know the little nuances, and how many times have you watched a movie and you saw something that was just, that gun doesn't do that, or the gun doesn't make that noise, or that silencer doesn't sound like that in real life. And for God's sake, I can't even watch The Matrix. Holy crap, I can't watch The Matrix. There are so many gun flaws in that video, that movie, that just irks the crap out of me. Yeah, we won't even get into that. So that's my intent for why I'm making this video, is I know what people are going to see and what people are going to notice, like the butt stock on this having a V notch right there on the butt plate. That's going to bug me now that I've seen it. Yeah, I know these things. These are my, this is what I know. This is what I do. This is what I know. So I'm willing to talk to anybody who would like to hire my services to review their weapons models, the way their characters are holding the models, the recoiling mechanism, how they actually recoil, reload animations, like for a bolt action, how you'd actually cycle the action, or things of that nature. Your animations, your actual gun models, the realistic functioning of, and the recoiling patterns, all those little fine nuances. That's what I'm looking to do, is be a technical advisor for all those little fine details that normally get looked over. I mean, I pointed out in one of my videos, I know guns, but I also know other things like trucking. Like, this is always going to bug the crap out of me about this game. If my character is 6 feet tall, that puts the bottom of this trailer framing at 6 feet. I mean, the developers of this game, and I love this game, The Division's a great game, I have a lot of fun playing with it, but it kind of makes me scratch my head when I look at this trailer. The bottom, this portion right here of a trailer, is actually going to be just below eye level. Go look at a loading dock. Go look at a real trailer. Google that shit. GTS, man. You'll see that the bottom of trailers are not that high. And who in the hell is going to put your air tanks right there? Or taillights right there? The term when you're backing a trailer up to a loading dock, whenever I drove truck over the road, it was always called bumping a dock. The line here going down here doesn't match the line here, meaning this is going to contact the wall first, leaving a gap of about 8 to 10 inches. What, you're supposed to jump your forklift? Well, first off, you're going to be sitting a foot above the damn dock you're backed up to anyway, so you're going to need a rock crawler for a damn forklift to get in this thing. And then when you go to bump the dock, you're probably going to hit it so hard that you bump your freaking air tanks and blow out your brakes. Yeah, little nuanced details like that, the more I look at them, the more it just drives me nuts. So, like I said, send me an email. All my contact information is in and around the video. Leave me a comment. I will get back with you as soon as I possibly can. I check my comments every day, multiple times a day, and we'll set up an email contact and phone calls and whatnot, and we can cover anything you want to cover about this aspect of technical advisor for firearms and guns in general, for TV, movies, video games, and what have you. By the way, I also design real ones too. So yeah. Alright, thanks for watching, and I will try to come up with a better, more briefer video in the future, but I just wanted to cover some basics about me and some detailed aspects of these firearms to show that I'm not just full of crap. Alright, thanks for watching.